The room smelled faintly of gun oil and sweat, the kind that clung to the air long after training had ended. Inside the steel-gray combat gym of Naval Base Coronado, 6 Marines stood in a loose semicircle, their laughter echoing against the walls. They weren't cruel men by nature, but boredom and bravado often twisted good soldiers into something else. At the center of their jeering stood a woman, small, quiet, and still as a shadow. Her name was Lieutenant Ava Raines. She hadn't said a word since arriving that morning. Her silence unsettled them more than any insult could have. They called her Mute Seal, not realizing the nickname would soon be carved into memory with shame and awe. "Come on, sweetheart," one of them sneered, stepping forward with the swagger of a man certain of his victory. "Let's see what you've got." Ava didn't move. Her pale eyes, a gray that mirrored the ocean before a storm, watched him approach. Her expression was calm, detached, but not indifferent. She was reading him, his stance, his shoulders, the subtle tilt of his weight, everything. The air in the gym shifted. Those who had been laughing moments ago fell silent, not because they sensed danger, but because they could feel something strange. A quiet pressure, the kind that settles before something breaks. The Marine lunged. No one saw what happened next. They only heard the dull thud of a body hitting the mat. The Marine lay flat, breathless, his expression stunned, while Ava stood over him. Untouched, motionless, she didn't even blink. Then another step forward, his pride burning hotter than logic. Then another, and another. Within seconds, the gym became a blur of movement. Strikes deflected, attacks redirected. Bodies falling. 6 trained Marines, each confident in his strength, now found themselves sprawled across the mat, gasping, disbelieving, humiliated. Ava hadn't spoken. She hadn't broken a sweat. The watching crowd, instructors, recruits, and seasoned soldiers, didn't cheer. They just stared. There was something eerie about her stillness, the way she seemed almost detached from the violence she had just delivered. It wasn't anger that had fueled her. It wasn't pride. It was precision, a discipline that came from a place deeper than training. A voice broke the silence, older, heavier. Commander Holt, a veteran whose gaze could freeze a man mid-sentence. "You all done laughing?" he asked, his tone low. No one answered. Ava turned her eyes toward the commander, saluted sharply, and waited for his nod. Then she walked past the fallen Marines without a glance, her footsteps echoing softly against the floor. Later that day, word spread across the base like wildfire. The quiet girl who never spoke had dismantled 6 Marines in under a minute. Some whispered she was a combat prodigy. Others said she was dangerous, unpredictable. But Holt knew better. He'd read her file. He knew the reason she never spoke. 2 years earlier, on a covert rescue mission in the Black Sea, a blast had torn through her unit's boat. The impact ruptured her eardrums, stole her hearing and nearly her life. Doctors said she'd never serve again, but Ava refused to be dismissed. She learned to read lips, to communicate with silence, and when she trained harder than anyone. Her silence became her sharpest weapon. Now, as dusk bled across the sky, she sat alone outside the barracks, her gaze fixed on the fading horizon. The wind carried the faint sound of waves, vibrations she could no longer hear but could still feel through the soles of her boots. For the first time since her injury, she allowed herself a small breath of peace. But peace was never meant to last long in her world. The next morning, a convoy arrived, unmarked, silent. A man in a dark uniform stepped out, his presence commanding without words. He carried a folder stamped classified. He handed it to Commander Holt. "We need her," the man said simply. Holt's brow furrowed. "For what?" "Operation Silent Tide," the stranger replied. "She's the only one who can pull it off." Ava, watching from across the courtyard, couldn't hear the words, but she could read their lips, and the look in Holt's eyes told her everything she needed to know. Another mission. Another storm. Her silence had made her invisible. Now, it had made her indispensable. The briefing room was cold, the kind of cold that seeped through bone and logic alike. Maps covered the walls, satellite images of a coastline scarred with enemy fortifications. The mission was simple in structure, Impossible in execution. Infiltrate, extract, exfiltrate. A three-step dance with death. The target, an American operative captured behind enemy lines. Communication signals were jammed. Drones were useless. The only way in and out was silence, and no one understood silence like Ava Raines. As the team assembled around the table, she stood slightly apart, her posture straight, her face expressionless. Her teammates spoke in low tones, exchanging glances. Some respected her, others doubted her. The mute seal, the woman who fought like a ghost, but said nothing. Holt entered, his voice carrying that heavy authority only earned through loss. You all know the mission, you all know the risks, but I'll make one thing clear. This team moves when Lieutenant Raines moves. Her eyes are your ears. Her silence is your cover. If you can't handle that, leave now. No one moved. Ava's gaze shifted across the room, scanning faces. She didn't see mockery anymore, just fear and trust's fragile beginnings. Hours later, under the veil of night, they moved. The sea was black glass, the air biting with salt and anticipation. Ava felt the rhythm of the water against the boat's hull like a pulse, steady, alive. She closed her eyes, counting heartbeats instead of seconds. When they reached the drop point, she signaled with 2 fingers, her hand motion swift, deliberate, silent. The team followed, diving into the dark water. Below, the world turned fluid and muted. Her body moved like memory, precise, efficient, every motion controlled, every sound imagined. The enemy camp rose from the shore like a jagged wound, lights flickering in the fog. They advanced. Shadows among shadows. At the perimeter fence, a guard turned unexpectedly. His flashlight sliced through the mist, pausing inches from Ava's face. Time froze, one misstep, one breath too loud, and the mission was over. But she didn't breathe, didn't flinch. She waited until the light moved on, then continued forward, her heartbeat steady, her focus absolute. Inside the compound, they found the captive, bruised, bound, and barely conscious. Extraction was supposed to be the easy part. It never was. A siren wailed. Faint at first, then rising, cutting through the night like a blade. Someone had tripped an alarm. Chaos erupted. Gunfire shattered the silence, and in that storm of noise, Ava became what the legends whispered she was. Untouchable. Moving faster than sight, she guided her team through smoke and panic, her every gesture a command. Where others shouted, she signaled. Where others hesitated, she acted. By the time the dust settled, the team was gone, vanished into the Black Sea. And when they resurfaced miles from shore, every man on that boat turned to look at her differently. Not as the mute seal, not as the quiet girl, but as the reason they were alive. She met their gazes, nodded once, then looked back toward the horizon, where dawn was just beginning to burn. But deep inside, she knew this was not the end. It was only the beginning of what silence would demand of her next. The sea mist clung to the docks at dawn, soft and grey, muffling the world in quiet uncertainty. The mission was done, the operative safe, but peace hung heavy, fragile and deceptive. Ava stood apart from her team on the pier, her uniform still damp from the night before. She stared at the endless water, its stillness reflecting a calm she couldn't feel. Behind her, the others laughed, voices low but relieved. The laughter of men who'd seen death and somehow returned. Yet even in their gratitude, something unspoken lingered. Every one of them had seen what she'd done that night, how she moved through chaos like silence made flesh. It was awe mixed with fear, admiration laced with confusion. Lieutenant, a voice called gently, Commander Holt. His presence always carried weight, like the ocean itself had decided to stand beside you. He approached her slowly, his boots heavy on the wooden planks. You saved lives out there. Don't let anyone take that from you. Ava nodded once, acknowledging, though she didn't meet his eyes. Holt had learned to read her silence. He saw what others missed, the tremor in her stillness, the pain beneath her composure. There was something different in her today, a quiet that wasn't calm but haunted. That evening, the base lights dimmed early. The celebration ended quickly, as if no one wanted to disturb the delicate air around her. She sat alone again in the training hall, that same space where months ago 6 Marines had underestimated her. Now, she was the legend whispered about in mess halls, the story every new recruit was warned with. Don't laugh at the quiet ones. But inside, Ava felt the same storm she'd carried since the Black Sea. The silence she lived in wasn't peaceful, it was deafening. Every mission, every moment of stillness brought her back to the explosion, the shattering pressure, the blinding flash that had taken her hearing, and her brothers in arms. Their faces still haunted her. Sometimes she thought she could feel their voices in her chest, like phantom echoes pressing against her ribs. She closed her eyes and began to move, training drills in total quiet. Her body flowed like water, the rhythm internal, her breath steady. Sweat formed on her temple, tracing the line of an old scar near her ear. Her movements became faster, sharper, until the air itself seemed to recoil from her strikes. Then she stopped. Something inside her, something she had buried beneath discipline, broke through the silence. Not a sound. A memory. That night in the Black Sea. The deafening roar, the flash, the scream she couldn't hear but could feel. She remembered her hand reaching out through the smoke, grabbing another's, her teammate, Ramirez, before the current tore him away. She never found him again. Ava's breath faltered. Her hands trembled. She had survived when others hadn't, and sometimes survival felt like betrayal. When she looked up, Commander Holt was standing in the doorway, watching quietly. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. He walked to her side and placed a folded envelope on the bench beside her. "Orders," he said simply. She didn't move. "This isn't like before," Holt continued, his tone softer. "It's bigger. Black Ops. They want you to train an entire covert unit. Silent combat. Infiltration under comms blackout. They're calling it Echo Division. You'd be leading it." Ava looked down at the envelope. Her fingers brushed its edge. Leading it? The word sat heavy in her chest. She'd spent her career avoiding the spotlight, surviving in silence, not commanding through it. But this was different. Why me? She asked with her hands, the sign language fluid, hesitant. Holt watched her carefully, because they finally realized what silence can do. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The hum of the overhead light seemed distant, faint, a vibration she could sense more than hear. Finally, Ava nodded once, a quiet acceptance. That night, she lay in her bunk staring at the ceiling, the faint light from the corridor spilling across her face. Sleep didn't come easily. Her thoughts drifted between ghosts and duty, between the silence that defined her and the voice she no longer had. Somewhere deep down, she knew this new mission wasn't about redemption or recognition. It was about control, not of others, but of the silence itself. For years it had owned her. Now she would own it. In the morning, before the sun rose, she was gone. By the time the others awoke, word had already spread. Lieutenant Ava Raines had accepted a classified command assignment. No one knew where she was going. No one would. All they knew was this: when she moved, people followed. When she acted, silence spoke louder than any order ever could. And for the first time since her injury, Ava Raines didn't feel broken. She felt ready, because silence, she realized, wasn't emptiness. It was power waiting to be understood. And she was about to teach the world how devastating it could be. The desert was an ocean of dust and heat, endless and merciless. Wind swept across the barren ridges, carrying grains of sand that bit into skin like 1,000 tiny blades. In the midst of that vast emptiness, a convoy of armored vehicles rolled forward, silent, ghost-like, their lights dimmed. Inside the lead vehicle sat Lieutenant Ava Raines, her face half-shrouded by the scarf pulled tight across her jaw. Her eyes, sharp and focused, reflected the amber glow of the horizon. This was her unit now, Echo Division. 6 operators, each handpicked for their ability to fight, move, and survive without sound. Soldiers trained to disappear even in daylight. They'd spent 6 months under her command, learning what silence meant. Not just the absence of words, but the discipline to move with absolute intention. Every step, every breath, every heartbeat was a calculated act. And now, their first mission would test everything they had built. The target was a deep-buried fortress hidden beneath the desert, used by a rogue military cell to detain high-value hostages. The site was impossible to infiltrate by conventional means. Communications were jammed. Any noise above a whisper triggered motion sensors buried in the sand. In other words, The only way in was the way Ova had lived her entire life, through silence. As the vehicle stopped on the ridge, Ava stepped out, the sand crunching faintly beneath her boots. Her team followed Sergeant Cole, the sniper with a haunted past, Reyes, the medic with steady hands, and 3 others who now moved with the same eerie precision their commander did. They trusted her completely. They didn't need her words. They had her eyes, her gestures, her unspoken authority. Eva crouched, tracing a line in the sand with her glove, a map drawn in dust. The others gathered close, studying every signal she gave. Then, without a word, they descended into the valley. The silence was suffocating. Every movement had to be perfect. A rifle strap brushed against fabric, a whisper that could mean death. Sweat beaded along foreheads, trickling down necks, vanishing into desert grit. The only sound was the pulse pounding in their ears. Ava led them through the outer fence, her knife gliding effortlessly through the mesh. They moved like shadows, slipping past guards, unseen and unheard. For a moment it seemed unreal, like the world had slowed to match the rhythm of her heartbeat. Then, a misstep. Cole's boot pressed against a buried sensor too deep to spot. A faint click, a heartbeat's pause. Then the desert roared to life. Floodlights blazed across the sand. Alarms screamed into the sky. Bullets tore through the air like wasps. Ava's instincts ignited. She signaled rapidly, directing her team to the cover of a dune. Muzzles flashed in the distance. Dust exploded around them. The fortress was awake, alive, furious. And yet, amid the chaos, Ava remained calm. Even when shrapnel sliced through the sleeve of her uniform, she didn't flinch. Her silence wasn't absence, it was control. It gave her team something to anchor to, a stillness inside the storm. They pressed forward, crawling through trenches, dismantling sentries, moving inch by inch until they reached the underground entrance. Ava placed her hand on the scanner, hacked by their tech specialist earlier that night, and waited. The metal door hissed open. Inside, darkness swallowed them whole. The corridors were narrow, the walls pulsing with dim red emergency lights. They navigated like ghosts, their shadows slipping across concrete. Ava's eyes darted between corners, calculating every angle. At the far end of the corridor, behind reinforced glass, the hostages waited, terrified, huddled, unaware of the rescue closing in. Then, from the corner of her vision movement, a soldier, not one of hers. He turned the corner, rifle raised, and before he could speak, before he could make a sound, Ava was on him. One motion, one strike, silent. The body dropped, caught gently before it hit the floor. Her team advanced. When they reached the control room, Cole started cutting through the locks. But something was wrong. Ava felt it, that crawling instinct that years of combat had honed. Her eyes flicked toward the monitor. A countdown blinked on the screen. 2:17. A bomb, and not just one, dozens, enough to turn the entire fortress into dust. Her mind raced. Sound was death. Communication lines were jammed. There was no calling for extraction, no help coming, only 2 minutes. Her team looked to her. Panic flickered in their eyes, fleeting, human. Ava breathed once, steady. Then she began to sign, quick, deliberate motions that cut through the dark. Ray's diffuse team left. Cole, cover perimeter. I'll handle main charge. They moved instantly. Ava sprinted through the lower corridor, her boots pounding in rhythm with the clock. She found the main device, a crude lattice of explosives wired into the structural core. Her fingers trembled as she traced the lines, calculating which would kill her faster if she chose wrong. 0:52. Her pulse slowed. Her world shrank to a heartbeat and a wire. 0:29. Her breath came steady now. Sweat slid down her temple, cold as fear. She found the detonator, a single blue strand feeding the others. She remembered the Black Sea, the flash, the sound she never heard, and she smiled. Not because she wasn't afraid, but because silence had already taken everything from her once. It wouldn't take her team too. She cut the wire. Then nothing. No explosion, no roar, just silence. The same eternal, infinite silence that had defined her life. When she opened her eyes, the timer read 0, still, dead, safe. Cole burst into the room seconds later, his face streaked with grime and disbelief. He didn't need words to say it. She had done it again. They evacuated the hostages under the fading hum of alarms. By the time the sun rose over the dunes, the fortress lay abandoned, just another ruin swallowed by sand. Back at base, the debrief was short. Classified. Her name wouldn't appear in the reports. Her silence would remain, as always, uncredited. But in the quiet hours that followed, the men and women of Echo Division gathered outside her quarters, waiting. When she finally appeared, still in uniform, they stood in a perfect line and saluted. No words, no speeches, just silent respect. Ava looked at them. Her team, her creation, her reflection. The silence between them wasn't empty anymore. It was full of loyalty, of understanding, of something deeper than sound could ever express. And in that moment, she realized the truth she had been running from since the explosion. She was never mute. She had simply learned to speak a language the world had forgotten how to hear. As dawn broke over the base, painting the sky in pale gold, she stood tall against the wind. Her scars, her silence, her strength, all of it was hers. The woman they once mocked as Mute Seal had become something far greater. She was the voice of the voiceless, the calm inside the chaos, the proof that silence, when wielded with courage, could echo louder than any battle cry ever could.